I'd like to start with the words of Maya Angelou. She said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So a couple months ago, I was talking with a friend, and she was telling me about a really busy day she had, where she kind of just had one appointment after another. And she was dropping her husband off at work in the South Bay, and she was walking through the office building, and as she was walking through, she was kind of in a hurry, so she was like checking her email and walking really fast, and she noticed everyone around her was also kind of in that mode. They were also kind of checking on their phones and walking fast, and as she neared the door opened, and a blind woman walked in. And this blind woman had a walking stick, and she was kind of feeling her way through the entryway, and she looked like she had been there before. She looked really familiar with the place. She was just moving a little slower. And as she walked into the entryway and walked past the receptionist, she stopped, and she said, "Hello." And in that moment, my friend realized that this blind woman was the first and only person out of the 20 or so people that had walked in the building in the time that she had been there. She was the first woman that said hello to the receptionist. And when I heard this story, it made me wonder, in my own life, what do I see and what do I not see? And what do I notice and what do I not notice? This one blind woman, she couldn't physically view the receptionist, but she could see her. She could share space. She could acknowledge her presence. And so we live in an era where people in cities see 5,000 ads a day, where we can text, we can tweet, we can email, we can FaceTime, we can Skype at the tips of our fingers, or even now at the blink of an eye. 76% of adults under the age of 35 check their Facebook account right when they wake up or just after they get out of bed. And every day, 4 billion videos are streamed on YouTube, 750 million Twitter subscribers tweet 500 million times. So yet, in the midst of all these modes of communication, we're also growing more disconnected than ever before. A study at Duke University reports that the average American adult has just 1 to 2 friends that they can really count on. 1 in 3 adults over the age of 45 consider themselves chronically lonely, which means they've been lonely for a long time. And for the first time in 30 years, mental health disabilities like ADHD outrank physical ones among children. So this is the quality of our human connection today. This is the world that we're growing up in, but it doesn't have to be. This is Emily and her mother, Anne. So 15 years ago, when Emily was 1 year old, their house burned down in a fire. And Emily, at the time, they rented a home on this busy street where a bus would come by for commuters. And Emily at the time was amazed with buses. She loved them. And Anne saw this. And so every morning at 8 a.m., Anne would scoop her up in her arms, they would walk to the end of the driveway, and they would wave at the bus driver as it passed by. And they did this for a couple weeks, and then after a while, the bus driver, every time it passed by, he would honk his horn, or he would flicker his lights to say hello back. And after a while of doing this, one day, the bus pulled to a stop right past their driveway. And Anne was a little surprised because there were no commuters that day. There was no one to stop for. But the bus driver got out, and he walked towards them. And he had a gift bag in his hand. And he said, "My name's Harold Johnson, and today's the last day of my route. And I want you to know that seeing you two standing here smiling and waving every morning brightened my day. So thank you for your kindness." And so inside the bag was a little stuffed bunny rabbit for Emily, and Emily named it Hop Hop, and it still sits on her bed today, 15 years later. But what gets me about this story is that Emily's 1-year-old wonder saw the bus driver, and Anne's love for her daughter saw Emily's joy when she saw the bus and the bus driver. And so that motivated them to take out 5-10 minutes of every day to walk to the end of their driveway and say hello, to greet the bus driver, to see him, just like the blind woman every day sees the receptionist, right? And so in these stories, I want to explore what these little micro moments of care how they can really impact the way we see the world. So these are smile cards. They started as a prank several years ago. So the idea is you do a random act of kindness anonymously, and you leave this card behind to invite the recipient to pay it forward. So the classic example is at a toll booth. You're going through, you pay for the card behind you, and you leave this card behind for that card, right? Or you're at a cafe, you pay for the order behind you, or you pay for someone's coffee, and you give this card to the cashier to give to them. One time we had a friend who was at the airport, and he got upgraded to first class. And he thought, I want to practice kindness. I just want to do a random act of kindness. I'm going to switch my seat with someone in economy. So he found an elderly woman in economy, and he asked her if she would like to sit in his first class seat. And if you think about it, you might be wondering, why would someone do this? Why would I trade my nice first class seat for an economy seat, right? But then imagine being the recipient of one of these acts. And imagine being the giver. And imagine living your life in a dance of giving and receiving these small acts. How does that change the way you see the world? How does that change the way you are in the world? And what you think is possible? So science actually supports this. We found that when you do a nice thing for someone else, it lights up the same parts of your brain as doing something nice for yourself. We've discovered mirror neurons, which literally enable us to feel each other's joy and pain and everything in between. Researchers at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center found that people that did random acts of kindness for 10 days in a row rated themselves happier than those who didn't. Researchers in Great Britain have found that one smile can provide the same stimulation as 2,000 chocolate bars or receiving $25,000 in cash. Sean Aker studied this at Harvard for 12 years. He studied what makes people happy, and he calls it the happiness advantage. He found that a positive brain performs significantly better than one that's negative, or one that's neutral, or one that's stressed. And the way it works is, when you're positive, it activates the dopamine in your brain, and it activates the learning centers in your brain. And so that kind of boosts your creativity, your energy levels rise. And in their research, they found that people with positive brains are 31% more productive, salesmen are 37% more effective at sales, and doctors are 19% more accurate at predicting the correct diagnosis when their brains are positive versus when it's negative, or when it's neutral, or when it's stressed out. And so this reminded me of this man, Dr. Venkateswamy. He's better known as Dr. V. And Dr. V wanted to be a doctor all his life. And when he was in his 30s, he contracted rheumatoid arthritis, which is a crippling disease that kind of attacks his joints and left him in a constant state of pain and with crippled fingers and toes. So he couldn't be a doctor, but then he did the next best thing and became an ophthalmologist. And when he retired at the age of 58, he started an 11-bed clinic to kind of cure people's eyes, to restore sight for people in India. And over time, it's now grown, its name is Aravind, it's now grown to become the largest provider of eye care on the planet. In 36 years, it's seen more than about 32 million patients, and it's conducting nearly 4 million surgeries. But what gets me is this quote from him, and he says, "Intelligence and capability are not enough. There must be the joy of doing something beautiful." So the joy of doing something beautiful, what does that mean? This is Raghu. We call him Raghu Bhai, because Bhai means brother in the region of India that he's from. So Raghu Bhai grew up in the village. When he was 1 year old, he contracted polio, and so he lost the use of his limbs. So he walked on his hands ever since. But he never saw himself as handicapped or disadvantaged or in need. He actually would constantly ask, how can I offer value? How can I give in this moment? And as an adult, he moved to the cities. And he found work at a temple, where people would go to the temple, they'd take off their shoes, he would arrange their shoes. A few years ago, he noticed that these elderly women in the slums in India, near where he lived, they didn't have the social support or the material support to eat on a regular basis. So he decided, being a man of very modest means himself, he still decided, every day before I eat my own lunch, I'm going to feed these women. So he ended up delivering 15 or more lunches to these women every day. And as he went on his rounds, he wouldn't just drop them off. He would visit with them. He would listen to them. He would, show care in small ways. He would comb their hair. He would smile, right? He just showed that he cared. And as he made his rounds, he would look around the neighborhood and see what people needed there. If there was a family where there was domestic abuse happening, he would bring a plant of holy basil, of tulsi, as an offering for them to take care of together. And it wasn't just a plant as a gift. He would go back and he would use the plant as an excuse to connect. He would check up on the plant. But then he would also say, how are you? How are you doing? It was his way of saying, I see you, and I see that your life is inextricably tied with my life. And I support that. I want to support that. I'm here for you. Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist monk.
One second.
Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Buddhist monk, says, when you love someone, the best thing you can give them is your presence. So, in Raghu Bhai's example, he wasn't just giving these meals and these pots of plants, but it was the love that he poured into the act of giving them that people received, right? It was his caring concern. It was his attentive ear. It was his smile that people felt. So it was how he did it, not what he did that mattered. And we're so trained today in our culture to measure value because that's easy. It's easy to measure, the worth of a paycheck or a grade or a job or the cost of your college tuition or your college degree on your resume, right? But how do you measure the spaces in between? How do you measure the joy of doing something beautiful? And what role does that play in your success? So back to Sean Aker, he studied this, and they found that job success, only 25% of it could be predicted by IQ. So the remaining 75% of your job success was based on your optimism, your social support, and your ability to see stress as a challenge rather than a threat. Lynn Twist, a global activist, author, speaker, she says, what you appreciate, appreciates. So what we focus our attention on becomes more abundant in our lives. It's like when you learn a new word, you start to hear it everywhere. Or when you learn a new theory, you start to see the world from that lens. So I volunteer with this group called ServiceSpace, and we leverage technology to tap into the belief that people naturally want to be kind. So that there's a fundamental sense of generosity within each of us, and that when we design spaces for it to emerge, we can connect with our shared humanity. One of our projects is called Karma Kitchen. Karma Kitchen is this pay-it-forward restaurant where you go in, you sit down, you get your menus, and there's no prices on the menus. The idea is that your meal has already been gifted to you by people that came before. So you can enjoy your meal, have seconds, thirds, whatever you want, and at the end of your meal, you get your bill, and it reads $0. And you're invited to pay it forward however you're moved. So all sorts of things happen at Karma Kitchen. One time at Karma Kitchen in Berkeley, we had this guy come in for lunch, and he had no idea about Karma Kitchen. He just wanted to eat lunch, and he wasn't really interested. So he sat down, he ate his lunch, and at the end of the meal, the volunteer brought him this bill, and it said $0. And he said, okay, so you trust me to pay what I want. I trust you to bring back the right change. So he pulls out a $100 bill and gives it to the waiter. And this was the waiter's first time volunteering. He takes the $100 bill, he walks to the back of the restaurant, he's scratching his head thinking this was not in the volunteer orientation. And he's a really technical guy. He's a computer science PhD student at UC Berkeley. So he's running through all the scenarios in his head. He's like, maybe I can split it 50-50. Or maybe I can calculate the cost of the food and the labor and then give him what's left over. Or maybe I can give him a percentage. And he's spinning his gears for a while, and then he stops. And he taps into that space inside himself that brought him to volunteer at Karma Kitchen to begin with. And then he gets an idea. He pulls out his wallet. He takes out a $20 bill from his wallet. He goes back to the guy, gives him the $100 bill, puts the $20 bill on top of that, and so the guy gets back $120 in change. He's stunned, the volunteer's stunned, and in that moment they both sort of get what Karma Kitchen is all about. So in restaurants, we kind of operate in a transaction, right? We go, we get our meal, we sit down, we give money to cover the costs and the labor. But at Karma Kitchen, we shift from transaction to trust. And when we do that, the value that we generate stretches far beyond just the finances. How do you calculate the generosity of people's hearts? How do you measure gratitude? How do you quantify being touched by another person's compassion? There's the science, but then there's also your own experience. Writer Annie Dillard says, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. This is our online portal called KindSpring. It's a website where you can go, you can read and write stories of random acts of kindness that you've done or received. Last fall, a group of us did a 21-day kindness challenge, where we did a unique act of kindness for 21 days in a row. And on the first day of this challenge, I happened to be at the airport, and each day you would get an email that had an idea of the day. You didn't have to do it, but it was kind of a seed of an idea. So the first day's challenge was pay forward a surprise treat. So I'm walking through the airport, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, maybe I can find a cafe where I can pay forward my surprise treat. And then I find this cafe, and there's this long line, so I go stand in it. And then my mind starts spinning in all these directions, right? I'm like, oh, well, what if the barista's really stressed out, and like he says, no, you can't pay forward someone's treat? Or what if the person behind me hears me telling them that I want to pay for their treat, and then it's not anonymous? And so all these thoughts kind of convinced me to not do it and keep walking. So I kept walking. And then I get to this ice cream store. And at the ice cream store, there was no line, so I couldn't convince myself not to do it. So I went up to the cashier and I was like, can I pay for the ice cream for the person behind me, or the next person that comes? And she said, sure. So she rang it up, and then I gave her a smile card, and I said, can you give this to them too? And she said, okay. And she looked at it, and she was really curious. And we ended up having this conversation about the kindness challenge, about random acts of kindness that we've done, and she ended up asking for a few smile cards if I had extra, so that she could try it on her own. And after a really sweet interaction, I went and sat down at my terminal. And about 5 minutes later, this little boy walks by with an ice cream cone from the direction of the ice cream store. And I don't know if it was the one I paid for or not, but it doesn't matter. I felt connected to him. And in that moment, I felt connected to everyone else in my terminal. I started to see them as myself. I started to see them with the same hopes and dreams and vulnerabilities and everything that I would feel, right? And instead of being in my usual habit of being polite and at a distance, I was open and curious and ready to engage if they wanted to engage. So what I realized as I went through this challenge was that it wasn't that much out of my way to smile at a stranger, to give a compliment to someone, to pay for someone's ice cream, right? I was just in the habit of not doing it. It was my default not to do it. But the more I started to do these small acts of kindness, it started to shift something inside. There's a growing body of research that says that 21 days can be the shortest amount of time it takes to change a habit, if that includes doing it in a shared community and with reflection. So a couple summers ago, we also had some interns, and they did a 30-day kindness challenge. This is Tao and this is Baltic. And Baltic's challenge, so the thing is with these kindness challenges, the beginning is pretty easy, right? You can give someone a compliment, you can give someone, chocolate or flowers, or it's pretty easy to think of ideas. But then as you get to day 20, or day 21, or day 25, you start to have to really get creative about what you do. It makes you kind of push your boundaries in kindness and kind of look at it in different ways. And so Baltic was studying for his finals one day at the library. It was like 9 p.m. And it was like later on in his challenge. So he realized, oh man, I haven't done my act of kindness yet today. So then he gets up and he starts looking around for something to do. And he stumbles into the janitor. And so the janitor's cleaning the bathroom and he says, excuse me, this is gonna sound weird, but can I please help you? And the janitor stops, looks at him. She's like, I'm sure no one's ever asked her this before, but she says, okay. And so he gets on his gloves and he's like, okay, I'll clean the men's room. And he goes to the men's room and then he's like, oh man, now I actually have to do this. But he does it. And now, today, 5 years later, every time Baltic goes back to that library and sees that janitor, she says hi to him. And he says hi back, and they connect. So as we build this habit of kindness, we move into these circles of trust. We step into an ecology of our shared existence. Each small act strengthens the ecosystem. Each small gesture of care changes us. And in so doing, it can change the world.